So, welcome everyone to Repairing the Home to Treat Illness. My name is John Jensen, and I'm the Director of Sustainability at McGran Associates. Um, we work mostly in new construction, which is why I am just the moderator here, or I do, not McGran. And I am joined by two very impressive women today. Celia Smoot, the Vice President at the National Affordable Housing Trust. Want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
And Callie Seltzer, the Director of National Housing for LISC.
Good morning.
So before I hand the ball off to our presenters, I just wanted to make sure that we're clear on what it is we're talking about. Health in housing is a hot topic, but why did that become a thing? What is the cause of that? Why is it so important to think about now? As you probably heard at the beginning of a number of presentations and various speeches over the past 8 or 9 months, COVID-19 has exposed the huge economic inequality that exists in our nation that was ignored by large swaths of our population. Probably not those of you who are coming to Homes Within Reach. We're expecting a little bit higher sense of awareness from the average attendee to this conference. But why is that the case? And what are the drivers of that? Is a really confusing topic for a lot of Americans. So, one of the things that drives economic opportunity is obviously, who you know and where you're coming from, educational attainment, all those things. But think for a moment, if you're a person who is lacking access to safe housing, or if you're a person who is struggling with some sort of long-term health condition or an acute health issue, it's going to be really hard to think about anything else than that issue, which is so present in your day-to-day, moment-to-moment existence. And it turns out that the home is a huge piece of what makes us healthy or not healthy, determining our health outcomes. It's a huge piece of what's called the social determinants of health. What kind of housing are you in? Now, we know that across all homes from EPA, there's a often quoted statistic, indoor air is on average 9 times more polluted than outdoor air. So that means for many homes, perhaps I would wager many on homes of lower income individuals, the number is much greater than 9 times. So why is that how does that come to be? Well, we know that folks who either are lucky enough to own their home or who are tenants in a lower income setting are more likely to live with deferred maintenance, right? They're more likely not to have the readily available funds to make the repairs to the chipping paint at the windowsill, or either bulk water like rain coming in a place, or a plumbing leak, or even subpar ventilation. All of those issues can lead very quickly to moisture accumulation that can lead to mold, which contributes to this sort of miasma of unhealthy indoor air that increases the downward pressure on those health outcomes. So, this I also want to mention carpet that is not frequently enough replaced is a real bugaboo for me. And even folks who are struggling with really high utility bills may take a step to heat their home with the oven or an unvented fuel-fired space heater, both of which are not properly vented and contribute to more pollution within the home. A logical solution in the short term, but that can have some pretty serious consequences and increase, again, that downward pressure. So, there's always some tension in affordable housing. Do we want to just create more homes and just get more people into housing? Or do we need to maintain a certain standard of quality so that we're not helping people trade that housing challenge for a health challenge? And I, along with our presenters here, believe that both are possible. But I personally do not understand completely how to get this done. I work on a lot of low income LIHTC developments, which are solving the problem, but are nowhere near enough to meet the demand. And we have tons of existing affordable housing that is struggling with these issues, and naturally occurring low income housing that, may need some help to get up to the high healthy standards that we have set for ourselves going forward. So that's the problem. That's what I have to offer. And I'm very happy to hand the ball off to Celia to explain to us what she and her organization are doing and see as a pathway to help resolve this.
Hi, everybody. Give me a minute here. I'm going to share the screen. I believe this is it. This is it. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Celia Smoot. I'm at National Affordable Housing Trust. It's not letting me go forward. Why is it that? I'm sorry, we checked this earlier and is it moving forward on you guys side? Yeah, it's not moving. Oh, apparently I need to push harder. Sorry about that, everyone. Just real quick, NHT, National Affordable Housing Trust, we are the oldest nonprofit low-income housing tax credit syndicator in the country. We were started actually as a tax credit syndicator to really address the needs of high capacity nonprofit developers. A lot of the nonprofits that were first starting out when the tax credit program started out had a hard time finding syndication partners, mainly because nonprofits as they're structured and built weren't really the ideal financial partner for a lot of syndication at the time. Since then, the program has definitely matured quite a bit, and some of these nonprofit developers are some of the strongest actually in our industry. But in the beginning, there was a need for a very specific type of tax credit syndicator to address and to be able to be a partner to these nonprofit developers. Recently, the National Affordable Housing Trust has created a joint venture, and we are now, we were always partners with SAFE, which is a conglomerate of a bunch of nonprofit, high capacity nonprofit developers, but now we're also we also are a partner with Low Income Housing Investment Fund, which is a national CDFI, which is unfortunately, our industry has a lot of acronyms, and I am really bad with that. So CDFI stands for Community Development Financial Institution, and the next speaker can tell you all about CDFIs. We've done a lot of work over the years. I'm going to go quickly into the actual part of the presentation, and that is, and this slide might actually look kind of familiar to Callie. A large part of what we do in terms of trying to look at how we create investments to address issues, specifically housing and housing plus. And as John said earlier, housing plus health, good health outcomes have been a very clearly acute focus in our industry, even more so post, well, I like to say post-COVID, but I feel like we're still clearly right in the middle of it. And so as we kind of think about what it is that we're trying to build, how do we build a kind of financial resource or tool to make sure that not only we can create and preserve that affordable housing, but there's enough resources to also take that affordable housing and build in the necessary programs, building design to address good health outcomes as well as you're building and preserving that housing. I've kind of highlighted here four funds in which we have been very intentional. We've created a lot of intentionality with the creation of funding resources around syndicating the tax credits, and plus having an additive resource to address very specific health outcomes within the housing that's being syndicated, housing that we are investing low-income housing tax credits on behalf of investors. I'm going to actually focus really on two of them specifically. The first one would be our Strong Families Fund. And in our Strong Families Fund, we were the tax credit syndicator. We work with some high capacity nonprofit developers, and with a partnership between Goldman Sachs as our investor and Kresge and Robert Wood Johnson as a philanthropic partner, we were able to not only preserve and build new housing, but we also put in an intense amount of service coordination, and we were able to increase some of the green building standards in all of the housing that we touched. And frankly, I'm just going to just kind of dive down to one of the biggest issues we talk a lot about, and that is we want to be able to build the housing, but building the housing plus these other kind of better health outcomes, which will include like better air quality, more building green standards, that is not cheap, right? It's expensive. And one of the things we had talked about in one of our planning sessions here is like the biggest concern that I have with our industry is that we have the tendency, like, because resources are tight. Pennsylvania, there is so much tax credits and resources that can go around, and if there's something that has to get value engineered out of a development budget, a lot of times it's those extra things, like better building standards, better air quality, things that will help create better health outcomes, as well as kind of service integration. And to me, that is what we have to figure out a solution for. For us, our solution has been to create very mission-focused funds. And that is our fund is not successful unless we not only meet the investor yield requirements, as well as these health outcomes. And so we consistently create funds that match resources so that we can achieve both outcomes. Another example is our fund with United Healthcare. And in this case, we actually were able to work with United Healthcare not only as the investor in the fund, but also as the resource for the additional kind of a philanthropic grants resource in order to build out, again, better green building standards, as well as other things within, specifically, I think this is a good one to talk about asthma issues. There were a couple of properties in which we were working with developers, nonprofit developers who actually were buying older buildings. And as anybody who's been doing any kind of rehab or preservation understands that, like, trying to take an older building, bring it up to more current green building standards, as well as address other items within the building envelope and its systems, is expensive. But we wanted to do that, plus make sure that we are actually reaching those healthy outcomes. Way we were able to do that, and we were in a couple of markets where, in a couple of markets, specifically in one area in Nevada, where it was clear that this was a family project in which you were having series of children within that school district that were having immense asthma reactions. So a part of that rehab budget included things to really, I mean, frankly, gut and completely rebuild the air duct systems throughout and remember, this was kind of garden style housing. So it was not just one building, it was several buildings, and which means it was really expensive, but it was a commitment by that developer, and quite frankly, it was good. It was a commitment by our partner, United Healthcare, in order to address that and build the necessary additional, basically, grant resources in order to be able to achieve that. I think that as we get further, as our industry starts to mature, as we really tackle, and quite frankly, we just all resolve ourselves to the fact that COVID really exposed that, when we have this disproportionate reaction in certain communities, we can tie it directly to the housing, that even if they're in affordable housing and there's basically a roof over their head, the housing itself may be sited in an area that unfortunately creates these negative outcomes, specifically asthma, or the housing needs to be upgraded in order to address air quality and other kind of green standards, that is expensive. So instead of it being a way that just an additive portion, I think it has to, we have to resign ourselves that better health outcomes in how we look at preserving and rehabbing multifamily as well as single family homes. It should be the standard and not just an additive portion. We have figured out a way to do that mainly by intentionality and commitment, that every fund that we touch, all the housing that we touch will produce better health outcomes for the residents. And that's about it. It's my big head with straight hair. And I'm gonna pass it on to Callie at this point. Stop sharing.
Thanks, Celia. All right, I'm going to share my screen. One second. All right, 1 second. Sorry, it's not, here we go. I should do it. All right. I'm Callie Seltzer. I'm the Director of Housing for LISC, and we are kind of all over the country. We've got 37 field sites or offices, if you will, and we operate in about 2,000 rural communities as well. And just sort of real quick, our approach to housing is that we want to invest in programs and initiatives on the ground that both create and preserve affordability and really have that eye toward wealth building through housing. And sometimes that's just a matter of a stable housing factor. But I think today's conversation really, does cause us all to think about the question of, how do we not trade the housing challenge? We have a lot of them in terms of affordability, and now a added challenge around eviction and just sort of massive loss of income across the country. How do we not trade those housing challenges for health challenges? And so I'm going to kind of give a really high level view. I have a little bit of an urban ecology background, and it's really quite simple. Ecology is complicated, but when you come down to it, humans need clean air, clean water, clean soil for food, mostly, shelter. And as we've all felt and, learned, we really, really suffer when we don't have each other community-wise. And that's a really high level view, but I think it's important that we also keep that in mind and then trace that through how have we actually built? What is the built environment a result of? Does it reflect these things? And sadly, it does not. What we've built for the last 75 years, at one point in time, we used to use bioregionally sourced materials and, stuff that would come literally from your backyard. Your house would be made from wood that was, a mile away. We don't build like that anymore. And, that's not just a statement on where the wood comes from. It's a statement on all of the chemicals that are added to, the materials that we use to build homes. And so we have traded what we know, now about health to meet the production challenge. And we've done that for a long time. And this screen is a little more complicated than it needs to be, but just thinking about that more environmentally responsible design, we're somewhere in this, what I'd call the degenerative cycle down here. It would be great if we could just get to sustainable, 100% less bad. But when we work, and definitely we're in conventional practice down at the bottom here, one step better than breaking the law. But when we work on affordable housing, these are serious trade-offs, but we know enough now to try to do both in tandem. I think that's what Celia was getting at. We have to figure out how we both finance it and program it, and then also mind the shop long-term. So not surprisingly, here's just a chart of I think, John was also saying, that physical environment, your health behaviors, your socioeconomic factors, there's a lot around social determinants of health. But when you think about the communities that LISC works with across the country, 10% physical environment, that's a huge portion of someone's health, if air quality is considered part of that 10%. And then compounding factors, because, income and where you live probably means that you're deficient across all of these, that your opportunities are deficient. You're never really breaking 60 or 70% in this kind of health, at the human level. So at the building level and the human level, we've got to bring these together to address this connection. So this just kind of traces, sort of the initial housing challenge that I talked about. We've traded a lot of that for what we know now are not great health outcomes. We have a lot of even affordable housing across this country that's, old, and owners are trading off, questions of like, can I replace the carpet? No, because I want to keep it affordable, right? Like really basic affordability questions. But trace those through, to poor house maintenance or construction in this health factors column, or evictions, violent living situations. There's a very, very clear connection to the health challenges, what health scientists call that allostatic load. And then on the far right, you see the effects and the multi-generational effects of what this affordability or segregation, discriminatory policy, trace that all the way through. And we have more and more data today than ever before that show at a fundamental level what poor air quality or lack of ventilation, lack of circulation in a house can mean for kids in particular. So clean air is not simple, right? This is it's a lot of colorful circles, kind of building off of the well building standard, but you have a lot of things to think about if you're building or operating a property. So it's not nearly as simple as we need clean air. You've got to really figure out how to do this, how to finance it, and how to keep it. Tracing, that initial, I have a little story here. I moved in with a roommate right out of college, and we went to our new apartment, and I said, oh my gosh, it's got that new carpet smell. And I loved that new carpet smell. And she's standing there and she's like, I'm literally getting like a scratchy throat. And what I realized was, she had a severe allergy to something, or, had, I think she had like some kind of undiagnosed, maybe asthma even, but we had that new carpet smell is off-gassing of really bad chemicals and VOCs. And, it might, for some of us, be quite pleasant and triggers something in our brains. But she had a really bad reaction, and it was a pretty miserable living situation for her. We kind of, noticed it in the beginning, and it didn't change for her. She really had a bad allergy and reaction the whole time we lived there. So just a little story, but that irritation, headaches, respiratory disease, there is that longer term impact, and it's very traceable. So what do we do at LISC, right? We're focused on things like program design around green and healthy property management. How do you actually get the right resources to support that? I think Celia is operating really upstream at that critical level of financing it and getting investors to do it. And that's, if you don't have that upstream, then you don't have programs downstream, because these are not, programs that generate extra returns. So I think we're all as an industry trying to figure out how to prove that the social and the environmental return should be considered on par with that financial return. But we're not there yet. We don't have an agreed upon set of metrics to say, to an investor, you should take a haircut so that, these families can have, over the 30 years, we think they're going to have a better health outcome. But some investors think that way, and some do care. So get at them. That's what we're trying to do. And then just generally, how do we kind of get the cost effectiveness? I think especially now for a lot of the properties and a lot of our partners operating these properties, their expenses are so much higher. They've been paying for PPE and, meal delivery for people that have been in isolation. The property expenses are kind of through the roof for a lot of projects, in particular serving vulnerable populations. So, how do we recover from that and do things like tracking your energy, your water use, and in tandem with air quality, and really make those improvements? that we know have a direct impact on asthma, obesity risks. So I'll give you a couple examples. Just one that might be local for some of you. In Philadelphia, this program called the Home Preservation Initiative for Healthy Living. And this was really focused on improving asthma outcomes. We talked a little bit earlier, but the housing stock, we're talking about very high levels of asbestos, formaldehyde, biological pollutants, all of these things that, and VOCs in particular, radon, it's just kind of endemic to the housing stock of our older cities. And so when we are, trying to go in there and make physical improvements, those things are invisible. It's a lot, you don't see it on your utility bill. You don't see water or energy reduction, but doing all these things in tandem as a single program can really be the difference. So I first would just encourage y'all to think about how, when there is an energy or a water kind of upgrade, that you also focus on removing those chemicals and switching over to better household cleaning products, et cetera. So that's really what this was focused on, but for homeowners. And then second example is a program in Detroit that Celia is very familiar with. She helped set it up. She was formerly with LISC. So this is a 0% interest home repair program. And the idea here is that homeowners get kind of a patient loan so that they can address some of these issues. And that they are, they've got kind of public and private partners, including the city, committed to making those investments, which are, not investments that, again, repay investors, right? These are invisible in some ways, but the social and the environmental return are huge for communities that have, in Detroit, for instance, really stuck it out and stayed in those homes despite kind of tremendous disinvestment. And I'll just show you real quickly the partners, because I think that the program design here is so critical. So you've got the city, and they're really coordinating the program rollout, and also using their departments built in to kind of oversee construction management and monitor compliance with federal programs that help support it. LISC is sort of that intermediary, coordinating with those partners on the ground that are doing the actual loan. So the partners that are actually looking to see if a potential borrower can repay. If we give them this, if we give them a loan to make these improvements, can they actually do it and then repay and not put themselves in a bad face-off with paying their own mortgage or replacing a broken furnace down the line, for instance. And then you've got partners on the ground, Centers for Working Families. They're kind of doing the community-based social marketing, getting people the kind of financial counseling and showing them, walking them through applications. CDCs are doing the same thing, that community outreach, being kind of the connector to help people understand what this program could do for them, make sure that they're a fit and that they're fit and ready for this program. And then of course you've got someone who's doing what we would call the underwriting, actually processing and improving those applications, and then kind of all the way through, servicing the loan. And then of course you've got an investor, here, Bank of America. I want this to feel like it's a super complex system, but you are trying to build a whole ecosystem to support the program, right? And so you've got a lot of partners that need to be at the table. And as Celia discussed, a lot of that just flows from having the right questions and commitment set at the beginning to say there's an investor that's going to put money into this, and we're going to trace that all the way through. And here we are, start where homeowners going to submit that application, and then all the way through to the far, all the way through to the far right, those repairs are made, and you actually start repayment on the loan. So this has been a really successful program. I wish I could take any credit for it. I absolutely cannot, but very proud that this is part of our work in Detroit, and something that we do think is replicable in a lot of other places. So hopefully this gave you another perspective just on kind of that on the ground program design, the really messy part of this work. But happy to answer any questions, and thanks for your time.
There is one question here that I want to talk about, because I think that something that LISC has done that Callie can also provide a little more detail on, and that is, can you share anything about resources to improve health for tenants in privately owned rental housing? And I think that she touched on this earlier, but I distinctly remember a program that was done by our New York City LISC program that focused on property management and health outcomes. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but in reality, it's a big thing. It was a commitment from a lot of the developers and owners in affordable housing within that market to say that we were going to make requirements among our property management partners, and some of them actually did, self management around only using green and non-chemical products. Now, the green technology and green like words I'm not good at. Sometimes I'm too much of a finance person at the top, but Callie can talk a little bit more about, because I always found that program to be incredibly impressive, and something that I tried my best to always try to explain so that other markets could try to replicate this commitment that those housing providers did in New York. Callie, you want to?
Yeah, no, I think we've got a couple of resources that kind of guide property managers through this, because the truth is, property management, you are not always equipped, with the budget to change out your chemicals that you're using, and you've got to keep the property clean, especially now. Think of how sprayed to death all these properties are. And the impact that that's having, on people that live there. So I think the New York program, and I'm not actually that familiar with it, but the idea was to get at property managers, because they're that like connective tissue that actually makes sure that the thing happens, because you can't count on, you can't rely on residents who are working and have families, if they have a different chemical at their disposal to use in their own home, that's a free sample, or they're probably going to use it. But otherwise, people, I didn't know that that new carpet smell was off gassing. I think it feels like the nicest apartment I've ever lived in. That was what I thought, and I just, the property managers, if you can equip them with information and also tools, and literally with the right chemicals, the stuff that's not made from formaldehyde, and not got those biological pollutants. You got to get rid of your pests, your mold, your mites, your bacteria. But how do you do that effectively and keep kind of the whole system in balance? So that is, I think, that can be your champion if you can get at those property managers.
And then there was another question around how would you suggest developing a substantial fund in a more rural area with limited big business to support tax credit programs? And LISC has a very robust rural program, and also I'll let Callie speak to that. But I will say we've had this conversation ourselves. Some of our partners do have housing in some of the rural areas, because all of our partners are out of the 15 of them, I think only 5 of them only work in a small regional area. Most of them are national partners, have national footprints. And some of that housing is in rural areas. And one of the things that we have spent a lot of time thinking about and working through is that, and I'm talking about rural multifamily. Definitely, it's a different challenge when we're talking about a rural single family. It's a different challenge. We're talking about single family, period, but even more so, and even more acute when we're talking about rural single family. But in rural multifamily markets, we really try to focus on looking at that housing and how we resource any kind of rehabilitation of that housing in like trifecta. And I'm going to explain what that trifecta is. One, every state still has, has a limited resources of tax credits. That's very, very clear. And so we spend, and because the size of a lot of our rural properties doesn't really lead itself to being a 4%. So really, we need to be able to attract a very competitive 9% award. And so we spend a lot of time actually frankly, doing a lot of policy work leading up to that, having conversations with partners, organizations like the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance. Um, there's that organization across a lot of markets. And I know I've worked myself with the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance on other type of trying to build out other type of resources. And these are your great partners, because one of the things I would say is that they help to set and help to push certain policy priorities, and the idea that trying to find more resources for rural housing, you need this type of partner. So the trifecta is one, it's a policy push, creating a policy priority to make sure that there's specific funding that will be resourced at the state level for rural markets. And some markets like Texas, it's built into their program. They're like, look, we have some of these big cities, that's great, but this bucket of resources is only going to go to our rural parts of our market. And then for areas that do have these large rural areas, I mean, some people have, a sense of feeling about that. I know, as somebody who works in rural and in urban markets, I actually think it's good, because if not, you got to figure out a way to be more fair with the resources. And a lot of that was a policy priority push from a lot of rural partners that made that happen in Texas. The second part of this trifecta is really thinking about how do you leverage resources? In other words, if I'm a partner with a rural project, and I'm thinking about other things, what else do I have going on around there? Is there an opportunity to not only rehab, but also build additional units? And that's one of the ways we were able to address another project, was the idea that we were able to build additional units. That helped kind of bring up the uptake, which opened the door to much more different type of investment opportunities. And I think the third is looking at where are the philanthropic priorities. For right now, one of the things that COVID revealed for a lot of us is that this disparity around digital inclusion in rural and in low income communities. And what that made us realize is that not only do we have to think about housing, but that communication and that the communication that comes with that. And I want to say that people realize, like, when all of us were basically locked in our houses for like the high parts of telehealth became a huge issue. But for rural markets and certain low income communities, without that resource, because of the lack of digital inclusion, they weren't able to benefit from that. And the idea that somehow we're going to shift back to how things were before, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that we as a society are going to expand those type of opportunities. So for us, looking at that as an issue, we feel that there is a philanthropic push to expand resources to rural and local urban communities around that issue. And so that in itself will help us be able to bring more resources to a rural market. So I think about where that philanthropic push could be. And that's would be my trifecta. Callie.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I love that approach, because when you're talking about equity, you've got to address all these things, and there's never enough money to do it. But if philanthropic resources are being mobilized for the digital divide, and to and literally, if you have someone coming out to equip a house with with internet for maybe the first time, or just think about the programs that could be combined to also do some of the work that John does, like the kind of that McGran does, to look at what's the performance of this house overall in meeting our kind of equitable housing goals, whatever those might be for your community. Is it heating and water and internet? It's probably more than just one of those. So how do we do those things in tandem, I think is the real challenge for rural communities. There's an efficiency to be gained if we can do all of them through one program.
Yeah, tacking on additional repairs that are needed to a visit that's already happening is a huge benefit. So I completely agree. And you all seem to be the wizards of getting bureaucracy to work in that way. And so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing on those fronts. So we do have one more question here that I wanted to talk about from the audience, and then I've got a few that I hope I can get in, which is about mental health, and that it does seem to be a little bit off of the session title, but I still think that it's clearly worth discussing because, again, if you're lacking a solid mental foundation, it's very difficult to focus on anything else. So, are either of you aware of any programs that are encouraging what we're calling healing centered design, or other features of these developments that we're all involved in one way or another, that promotes a more solid foundation for mental health?
I mean, I'm not familiar with the other terminology you use. I will say that for some of our housing, again, the ones in which we are, all of our funds have a housing plus feature, but there are parts of our housing plus feature funds that specifically also fund casework. As and we try to explain this just brass tacks. Healthy and sound mind people are functioning and they pay their rent and they keep their unit nice. It is an economic advantage to an investor or a developer to create opportunities for those type of resources and services for residents. And so in some cases, we have really been able to get other resources, how to build in caseworker for residents who need the additional assistance and resource.
Yeah, I think one of the really good outcomes of our Philadelphia program, they saw a really direct reduction of stress and improvement of mood. The trick there is you have to track that. You have to have a baseline, right? You have to have something to measure against. And so to the extent that, we're all just trying to get this housing financed, there really does need to be a commitment up front to take some baseline metrics. And you have to also organize your residents to participate in something like that. People are not always inclined to tell their property owner or property manager, that they're about their personal mental health, but it actually is critical, I think, for organizations on the ground to collect that information so that we can say, when we, people, when they're living more comfortably in their homes, and they're not worried about the storm, literally a storm coming, and where it's going to leak, and is it going to leak on my kid's computer, which is a very direct example recently that we were talking to a resident about. Then because the kid needs to be in school, right, from home. Yeah, if you're not worried about those things, it's a stress reduction. But we have to track them kind of upstream at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah, the term I used was something that I learned from a really awesome presentation on a place called Lotus House, which is in a shelter in Miami, where they recognized that the majority of their residents were people who had experienced trauma, and they were looking to, the designers went hard on, natural finishes, things that would be soothing, avoiding dark corners, avoiding things that were gonna potentially trigger someone in that situation. But yeah, all those things, it seems like the common thread amongst those that were just discussed is the reduction of stress, right? Stress is necessary to a productive human life, but we want it to be focused on things that are worth stressing about, not leaks on computers. So,
right.
So Callie, I'm curious, given how stretched the budgets are right now, I mean, we know that there's all this talk about helping renters, which is absolutely admirable. But if we say renters don't have to pay their rent, then landlords, big or small, are going to face some issues making their mortgage payments. So assuming that the folks who are responsible for the repairs are also in financial distress, which, you know, will sometimes be the case, sometimes not. How can we make sure that that doesn't lead to more deferred maintenance and worse conditions for the people who live in those homes?
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity with the rental assistance infusion that Congress has passed. So there's 25 billion flowing to the states. When you think about it, if I'm a landlord, I've got income from residents, and then on my expense side, I've got property maintenance, I've got taxes, and I've got to pay my mortgage if I have a mortgage, right? That income side is not where it was a year ago for most people, for most landlords. That puts downward pressure on all the other, including deferred maintenance. And what we know is true for a lot of landlords, at least, you know, they're going to try to pay their property taxes and stay right with the government before they're going to fix a roof. They're going to defer it, right? So how do we kind of use this opportunity, the 25 billion, as the kind of shot in the arm or the liquidity infusion that the system needs, so that landlords can also just make the right decision for their asset right now? You know, we have to make sure we protect residents and tenants from eviction in that process, and hopefully the CDC eviction moratorium is extended, so that, you know, that face off is not there. But, you know, let's assume that you know, eviction is off the table. Important to make sure that's the case. We've got to get liquidity into the hands of landlords, so that they can address these things. And if they've taken out debt or credit card debt to you know, replace things in the past year, they should be able to make some financial decisions with those government resources. I really do believe that we have to give them that flexibility. If we constrain them too much and say, oh, you can only pay your mortgage with this, then we know that the maintenance will continue to be deferred. You know, these are small businesses essentially, so we've got to give them some flexibility, knowing that they're going to be also bad actors in the mix, and you know, there always are. But the greater good of what can happen with this program, or with the 25 billion, I think is tremendous if we give people flexibility and not constrain them too much to where landlords won't want to participate, right?
Well,
I don't know. Celia might disagree though.
No, I was like, even before COVID, you know, there was always this term floating around: deferred maintenance is profit. So, so you know, deep into this issue that we have now, I really call it like, I call it the rent pandemic. And then in the middle of this rent pandemic, we also have to figure out what's the right solution, so that, you know, I work with a lot of, you know, very mission oriented nonprofit that are clearly in the business of doing the right thing, the good thing. And we have tons of conversations about what is it they have to do in order to make sure they're still meeting the obligations to the tenants, because every conversation starts there. But we have to assume, we just have to assume that that's not where every landlord's first conversation is going to start. So we build in, I call it the guardrails into how we're going to deploy this capital, to make sure that, like, even if it's not their first thought, it's part of the compliance part of it to think about. So, yeah.
And how do we align those incentives to make sure that they see a benefit to them and to these are businesses, right?
And carrot.
Yeah.
So Celia, I wanted to follow up with you on something Callie mentioned, that, you know, if there is no money, there is no project, right? We need you and all the people who you work with to come up with something that is palatable, so that we can have a new project, or the rehab, or the program that is going on. So I'm really curious, in terms of the fund outcomes, or the perspective of the people that you're dealing with, do you think that it's more likely that we're going to be able to expand rehab and construction for better health outcomes, or come at it from the other direction and optimize the services there?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think that there's two parts of it that I want to get at. One, I think that we are in a resource constrained environment as is, and that a lot of our resources that will be deployed over the next 2 years will really just be repairing and trying to get us back to the poorly resourced place we were 2 years ago. I mean, so we're going to be trying to like, get back to even for the next 2 years, which means that the idea of expansion, I believe that there is a horizon there for us to get to a place of expansion. I just think that we all have to be honest that over the next 2 years, we'll just be trying to get back to even. And so I think that as we're trying to build out and repair what was lost, I think that we have to make a commitment that we're going to try to repair to better. You know, not we're our natural inclination is like to get back to even, and that's what's in, but we have to figure out how do we do that. Plus, like, is there a way to kind of just raise those expectations a little better? And since we're going to be doing things and deploying things in order to kind of repair what was lost, is there a way to kind of to move it to a better place in light of repairing to what was lost? And I think, and specifically around resources, I think there's a lot of commitment being made in between the philanthropic and the corporate world about addressing issues. I also truly believe I've been doing this for way longer than I would like to admit, and I've seen the kind of cycle, the kind of shiny object chasing that a lot of our industry has a tendency to do. And but I think that the old adage, get it while it's hot, is very, very true right now. And so I would definitely be figuring out ways to kind of mobilize my organization to grab resources where folks are basically handing out checks as a way to kind of do that. And then I guess the second question was, how do we, the second part of that question was around like, how do we capitalize on resources and how do we maintain? I think that there's going to be a lot of capital floating around. I actually think that frankly, when I look at especially the multifamily industry, there's parts of it that took a hit. And there's parts of it that did really, really well. That really was able to manage to manage the economic downturn as a result of COVID. And I think that there's lessons to be learned from there. I also think that the idea that that's going to just sit aside and just like sit in a halo pocket somewhere. I think that we've got to push to make sure that the resources that were created as a result of that housing doing very, very well doesn't just sit there. That it really is incentivized to use those resources to do more and to stretch itself more.
Sure. Yeah, that's an important piece to note, that not everybody has been suffering, and for those who have been doing well, how can we translate that success into collective success? So, see, it feels like common thread here, almost as much as health has been constrained resources, and one of the sort of places that we as a society spend money, and we're talking about it, but we're not really talking about cutting back on it or controlling it or rationing it very much, is healthcare, right? So this to me has felt like one of those, when I first heard this idea, it felt like, oh my gosh, if we could just get everybody on board with that, we would unlock all kinds of resources to do the repairs necessary, and that's housing as a prescription. So it sounds like the HPI program that was referenced in Baltimore or in Philadelphia sounds like a great version of that. I guess I'm curious to hear from either of you if you have any thoughts about what it might look like for us to get to the point where I can go with my children who both have asthma to the doctor, and part of the prescription is here's your albuterol, and also somebody's coming by your house later to check on what you've got going on there and what may be some of the triggers. And then if there are triggers, there's a pathway to resolving them with funds behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we have to learn a lesson from kind of some of the early work around green, actually, and like LEAD, for instance, being a really, really great goalpost. But at the end of the day, once the plaque is, on the building and it gets that LEED standard, it ultimately comes down to operations and maintenance and who's turning off the lights or who's incentivizing residents to use less. And I think it's really, similar with this, like someone's got to mind the shop, right? For lack of a better term, to connect these pieces together to make sure that those, like carpet or whatever gets replaced, when a unit turns, that the right choices are made at that time too. And that someone's actually tracking it. I don't have a great answer because it's costly to track that. But I think if you can equip those property managers to really have an eye toward those outcomes, it's a start. And then
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because a big part of my work over the past couple of years has been writing those manuals for those property managers to try to tell them, like, use this carpet, not that one, these paints, not that one. So
critical. Yeah.
I mean, I hope they're being used, but they're a part of a lot of these green programs like Enterprise Green Communities and LEAD that are.
And I would say that, for me, I always kind of like, how are we going to pay for it? And I will say that having the right partners, but, understanding that they're incentivized in a very specific sense, like healthcare companies, there's tons of them across the United States. And there's, I think, 2 that operates, quite a bit in Pennsylvania. They have a specific incentive. Healthier people use less health insurance. I mean, I know that sounds like, but it's true. And then in some cases where they're managing specifically, Medicaid and Medicare, there is an incentive to really be able to figure out ways to cost containment and their health and resources to help bring people's health up. There's resources out there that can be unlocked for that. Having the right conversations and understanding that. One of the things I've been saying a lot to folks who've been talking about trying to create health funds, I say that it's not enough to say we will build this housing and thus we will make people healthier. That's not enough to create that incentive for those partners to kind of unlock the wallet. It needs to have a little bit more intentionality to it. And as Callie said, a lot more data attached to it. So one of the things you may have noticed, and I didn't highlight it nearly as much, but one of the things you noticed in both of those funds that I highlighted, there was a partner there who their job it was to create the metrics and the data collection so that we can prove out that return that Callie talked about, the investment return, as well as those health outcome returns. And you have to have that partner. And frankly, a tax credit syndicator, and that's not what we do. And plus, it's not even the right role for us. So having a third party that's in place to kind of collect that data, scrub that data, and be able to report out to all the participants is very, very important. And so I would say that role of partners, in order to be able to get us to the place where we can prove out that being able to write the prescription gives, clearly provides both type of returns, is important. And we have to continue building that out. So you have to make the intentionality and commitment to have those type of partners at the table.
Yeah, we're working on a project in Philadelphia right now that is, I believe Aetna is the tax credit purchaser, and part of their deal was, you've got to collect these data points, and it's a very limited ability community, and as a result of that, high healthcare use. So I'm really excited to find out what what the outcomes are in that case. So, but you're right that either I'm a numbers person as well, and I'm not in a position to write the metrics that are required to track the outcomes of these efforts.
Mm-hmm. I think we're
well, yeah, I think we're here to wrap up. Callie, Celia, it's been really a pleasure. Thank you so much for all the important work that you're doing and for being here today. And I really am stand in awe of all the action that you create in the market. And, hopefully we can only hope to do more going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much.